Welcome! Before we get started, I want to mention that our videos show the methods that work best for our projects, our car, and our budget. And we hope our suggestions are helpful as you tailor your projects to fit your individual circumstances, and that you'll always work safely and follow all local laws and racing club regulations, and treat all of our parts and fluids as restricted to off-street use until local approval is determined. For more information, tips, and product recommendations, visit our website, billsmgraceshop.com, and check out the Vintage Auto Racing Association website, vararacing.com. Hello. This video covers disassembly and preparation for going to the machine shop. Since the machine shop work is going to be unique to the circumstances of your engine build project, we're not going to cover every possible circumstance. Our particular situation is a complete build from scratch from a stock engine, but we're going to keep it general and provide some tips. Once you've got your engine to rebuild, if you haven't already done so, disassembly is pretty straightforward. You basically start from the outside, work your way in until there's nothing left to take off, with one exception, and that is leave the camshaft bearings. Unless you have the special tool for putting those in and taking those out, your machinist can take care of that. You don't need to take them out. In fact, it's less damaging if you try to do it with just regular tools and not the special adapter. In fact, that's one of the ways to find a good machinist, is you want to interview them to see whether or not they have rebuilt or helped rebuilders for British 1275 engines before, and you want to ask them, do you have the special tool to do the camshaft bearings on a 1275? And if they give you some general answer like, yeah, we have a whole bunch of tools, that's not really the best thing. You want somebody that's experienced with that engine and not just general mechanics. Another piece that you'll take off, this little bracket goes on the back and goes where the scrolling oil slinger is on the back of on the rear of the crankshaft. The 1275 does not have a rear engine seal. Instead, it has the oil slinger, and this little bracket fits around the crankshaft. Most of the 1275s out there have some form of rear engine seal leakage. So I'm going to show you how, once you take this off, to put it back on. Several people told me when I was breaking my engine down, leave this on. Don't take it off. Don't mess with it. If it doesn't leak now, I couldn't do that. My machinist needed to take it off because he was doing a line boring of the main bearing caps, and this was kind of in his way, so he had to take it off. I'm clear on how to put it on, and like I said, I'll show you later when we get to the crankshaft depth how to put this on and how to align it correctly. It's actually not very hard. Some of the other things you'll want to remove, for sure, the valves, the valve guides. If you're having the head ported and opened up, definitely the valve guides out. They're going to be doing a lot of work in there. If you can't get them out, there's a special tool for that, and if you don't have it, then don't just pound them out with a screwdriver. Take them to the machine shop and let them take them out. I took mine out because the head was rusty. I wanted to media blast it, so I wanted it as clean and open as possible. Some of the other things to consider, the 1275 engine, when it's manufactured, there are some internal passages that can't be formed in the mold. They have to be cut, they have to be drilled later. It's for oil. And when you have one area of the block where oil is and another area of the block where oil needs to be, you have to get some kind of a channel between those. And the way they did it is they drill in from the outside between those two voids where the oil goes, and then on the outside they take a brass rod, pound it in, flatten it off, and plug up that hole. And that works fine. The downside of that is for the part of that where they've drilled past the void and maybe haven't completely filled with the brass rod, you've got a little dead end there in the block, and gunk can collect in there. And if you're rebuilding an engine, in my case, I was rebuilding a 72, this is a 72 engine that was rebuilt once before. You have no idea when. could have been 20 years ago. So there's possibly 20 years of crud backed up in that little dead end. The recommended process is you drill out those little brass plugs, tap the hole, put in a plug similar to this hex Allen wrench plug that you can screw in, and next time then you can just back them out. You're able to clean that out, and then you can get to it the next time you want to refresh this engine and not have any problems. One of the things I recommend, the way I did it, was I went to the hardware store first to find these plugs, to get the ones closest to the hole sizes I had, so that I had them ready to go. Then I tapped out accordingly. These aren't necessarily available at every hardware store, so just make sure you have the right ones. And the brass plugs, the small ones pretty much fall out when you drill. The small ones are about 1/4 of an inch. The larger ones, if you drill them with I happen to be using a 1/4 by 20 tap and bolt, and all you have to do is drill the hole out, stick a bolt through a socket with a washer on the top, screw the bolt into the plug, and then as you screw the bolt in the socket, it'll pull the plug out. You don't have to use a hammer puller or anything like that. You don't have to jerk these things out. You want to carefully take them out. They might have been in there 40 years, so that first time you tighten the bolt down, you want to go kind of slow, but it'll pop, and then once it does, you can pull it straight out. Now in this picture, there are 2 on this side of the engine and 2 on the other, and those are the larger plugs you want to take out. There are 2 small plugs. One's on the side of the block, and one is down underneath by the oil pan gasket. And they're easy enough to find. Just look for the brass plugs. If you already have clean out plugs, then somebody has saved you a lot of time, and examine those accordingly. If they're rusted or whatever, then maybe replace them or maybe retap the holes. Now the reason for drilling those out ahead of time and getting your clean out plugs set up is so that you go to the machine shop with all of the things that are going to create filings and other debris out of the way. Do that first, clean the block, then you can send it. A couple other things to consider before going to the machine shop. One of them is the oil line. We'll talk more about that when we get to the oil filter, but for racing, the standard oil filter hookup is not enough on a 1275. There's a banjo fitting coming off the oil pump that goes down to the oil filter. That's not enough, and the recommended process is to remove that banjo fitting, drill out the hole, and tap it for a bigger fitting. Now if you can do a 3/8 fitting, I had trouble issues on my block, so I tapped it out to 1/2, and that's going to work out fine. You tap it so that you can put a hose fitting. I use AN8 for oil lines, and this makes a good flowing line. You don't want the oil to flow too quickly coming out of the engine to the oil cooler, because you want it to stay in the oil cooler long enough to drop some of the heat. Too big of an oil line, too fast of a flow, drops oil pressure, and also flies it through the oil cooler too quickly, and it doesn't give off any of its heat. It comes back almost as hot as it was, or at least that's my strategy. I haven't measured that. That's just the way we do it on our car. The other thing to consider, this is a picture of what's called a smog head. Through the history of smog vehicles in the US, one of the second phases after positive crankcase ventilation was pumping air behind the exhaust valves, which caused any unburned gas coming out to burn. I don't think it was fairly helpful to the head, beneficial to the head, but that was the way that they did it. And they attached an air pump to the engine, and they attached little nozzles going into the head, and that was what was done for smog control. What you want to do if you have a head like that, it's going to be a roughly 70s and forward version, is remove those plugs, and remember that those are not going to be drilled to directly screw in a NPT fitting. You'll have to drill and tap those out as well. Before you tap them, remove the smog head fittings, and then look for the tube. There's a tube that runs from the air port into behind the exhaust valve, and you'll see it when you look in the head. You'll see a little nub sticking out, and if you push on that little nub, it'll push it back into the port area, and you want to remove that tube. Then the recommended way to plug those is to drive a brass rod into that air channel to the point after you've tapped out the hole and found the right size plug. Drive that brass rod in, then with proper sealant screw a socket headed cap into that port hole and plug it up, and do that on all four of them, and you'll end up with eliminating that possible air leak. You don't want to have exhaust gas coming back through those holes out into the engine compartment, because if you don't plug them, that's what's going to happen. Now when you're ready to go to the machine shop, you'll want to leave those plugs out because they're going to hot dip the block, and you want to get as much cleaning in there as possible. Also, when you're ready to go to the machine shop, you want to take any of the parts that they're going to set up or work with. If you're having your head done, especially the valve seats, they'll need the valves you're going to use. They'll also need valve guides. If you're using new valve guides, send the valve guides along. If you want them to set up the head completely, then send the valves and all the keeper parts and have them do that. We're going to do a step where we're checking valve clearance later on, so I did not have them do the valve springs on mine because I'm going to put on a test spring and use it to check the valve clearance. Because of the head shaving and the block being decked and the compression ratio change, we need to really verify that these valves are going to clear the pistons properly. Something else you want to send the flywheel, the pressure plate. One of the things when you do, you should look for when you get it back is this little blue mark on here and this mark here and here. I notice there's 3 dots in there too. Those are the alignment marks. This is not attached, by the way, but they took the flywheel, did a little balancing removal. You want to know where they had it oriented when you get it back, so that you get this back on in the same place to do the balance. They also drilled some on the other side of this pressure plate. You'd also need to give your machinist pistons, connecting rods, so that they can factor those into the balancing. And also, if you're boring, if you've bought new pistons, they need to adjust the bore properly to fit the exact pistons and not just the specs in the book or the specs in the catalog. Most machinists won't touch the bore till they have the pistons in hand, so they can make exact measurements for it to come out correctly. And that wraps up this video. For more information, tips, and product recommendations, visit our website, billsmgrayshop.com.